So, I teach at UCLA Law School. I've taught animal law since 1994. And in the beginning, it was really tough. Had to create a lot of my own teaching materials. There wasn't a lot going on in the field. And then as time passed, a lot of litigation came along, a lot of legislation came along, and not so much change came along. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, I think, today. I want to back up to Gary's slide. It costs us so little to go vegan. It costs animals so much if we don't. So we have a recognition of that. We're here in this room sharing that value. And so sometimes we wonder why it is that for many people, it seems like it costs a lot to go vegan. This issue first came up for me in the work of Catherine McKinnon, a feminist who had done a lot of research about prohibiting pornography. And she said this, now that you know. She was talking about the harms, the damage to women, to our society that comes from pornography. Now that you know this, why will most of you find satisfying reasons to do nothing about it? And that was always the risk, that people would be informed and then not take the actions that one would expect in relation to the education. Today, I'd just like to present a couple of very old social psychological theories to try to work through this and why vegan product placement is such an important aspect of veganism, and it should be such an important aspect of animal law advocacy. So the first is cognitive dissonance. The idea that humans strive to reduce disparity between their beliefs, their values, and their behaviors. So if I am a kind person who likes animals, I will not cause them to suffer. I will not support businesses that cause them to suffer. We would think that this would be the alignment after all the education that we've provided to people or that has come their way. The other long-standing theory from social psychology is the idea of social conformity. Humans are uncomfortable when going against the grain of the society of which they consider themselves to be a part. Others value kindness to animals too. They would not be producing or preparing or eating products, consuming products created from the suffering of animals. So it's these two ideas that I'd like to bring together and talk about how animal law could make a difference, but hasn't so much yet. So the first is that I want to talk about is cognitive dissonance. So, you know, if somebody could walk into a restaurant, cafe, and say, you know, completely with clean conscience, I'll have the cruelly tortured for its entire life, kept alive with drugs, slaughtered inhumanely, processed unsanitarily, and cooked at very high temperatures to kill the salmonella sandwich. Then, you know, we'd have to look to other explanations as to why people's hearts are not open to the information that we give them. But the fact is that when people go in at the point of sale, they are not thinking about the aspects of what came before that sandwich, right? And when they look at an image like this, one wonders what they are thinking then too. If one were to ask them, are these animals suffering? A non-trivial, perhaps a very significant number of people would say, no, I don't think so. I don't see signs of distress. I see plumpness, I see feathers. They will look for in the image that which supports not just their beliefs, but also their practices. Okay, so this image, are they suffering? Let's take a simpler image. This image is from Solomon Ash's experiment in 1951. He would give a naive participant in the experiment, he would give them the card on the left. And so you see it's this single line. And then he would be asking the participant which line in the second card, which of these lines is the same length as the card on the left. Now take a second. I'm hoping it's obvious. It may not be in the reproduction of it. But this is what was going on in the experiment. The naive participant would be in the room with a bunch of other people who were not naive. They were confederates of the researcher. And all of them would say, why, of course, it's number one. They would all be already voicing their opinion about which one was the correct line before the naive participant. So with all of these people around the naive participant, in a significant number of times, the person, the naive participant, would come up with, I choose number one. Now, when Burns and others, this was 1951, when they did follow-up research to debrief participants in the study, and they do this follow-up research, Ash reported that he was surprised to find that some people, a significant number, actually perceived the line that they were shown on the left to be the same as a number one. And he didn't have the tools to check this out, but in 2005, Gregory Burns did have the tools to check this out. And so this is what Burns and others who were investigating this question thought about. So they said, if there is a visual, perceptual processing that's going on such that they're actually seeing that shorter line as being the same as the line that they're to compare it to, then we're going to see the brain lighting up at the back in the parietal region and the occipital region. That's what we'll see. If the person actually knows that there is a difference and it should have been number 3, not number 1, but they are wanting to go along with the crowd, then the prefrontal cortex is going to light up. And in a significant number of people, it was in fact the visual processing centers that lit up such that they actually were seeing line number 1 as being the same size as the line that they were asked to compare. So if we look at this then in the context of are they suffering, we can expect that a large number of people who have been exposed to kind people who fed them eggs all their lives are not going to receive the information that what they're seeing is actually suffering in a way that promotes their making changes. So if we have people around us who are saying all these messages about having egg salad or that omelets at this restaurant are really good, then when the individual who's tempted to say, well, maybe the oatmeal would serve me, may actually then be thinking omelet instead. Some voices are missing. I don't really like cartoon characterizations, but it worked with my bubbles here. If animals could talk to us about our food choices, they might suggest certain options to us. I like particularly the cow here, who's thinking that oatmeal without milk would be the ideal breakfast for anyone. But the fact is that their voices aren't in the room. Now, if we had somebody's voice in the room at a young age, like this person, the lunch lady, and remember kids, not only is milk a fat and health hazard, but when you're drinking milk, it means a sad and lonely calf somewhere isn't. We don't have these messages around us a lot. And so how do we get the messages to come forward that choosing vegan products can be a normalized, a normal thing to do? I apologize, I'm getting over bronchitis, and so my voice is a little bit strained. So how do we do this? This is my Whole Foods that's within walking distance of my house, and this is the gourmet cheese section. 99% of this cheese section is non-vegan. But if you look in the corner of this cheese section, you will see Kite Hill White Alder. And this is right next to the distinctively non-vegan Camembert and the Brie. So Kite Hill is occupying this spot in the gourmet cheese section. And you see people going up there. I've gone over there, and then I will walk up sometimes and I'll say to the cheese counter person, oh wow, how great, you have the Kite Hill in stock again. So then somebody turns to me and says, so you've tried that? What's it like? We have a conversation. Even not having a conversation, How many of you, when you've been faced with a decision, have seen what somebody else has chosen, and then you think, well, maybe I'll consider that one? It happens occasionally with some of our choices, right? Because really, capitalism has run amok. Thank you so much, that's really kind of you. Capitalism has gotten to the point where the choice itself can be really tiring. So product placement here, and also in the vegan section, has been really useful. So right a doorway away is a complete vegan cheese section where you'll also find Kite-tail products. So the question for us is, what does it take to get vegan products into a setting where people who wouldn't consider them are actually considering them? And that, I think, is the challenge. All right, so I got interested in, particularly in cheese, through work with this individual, the owner of the Cultured Kitchen. So Cultured Kitchen is a Northern California company, and they used to make this product, pepper jack cashew cheese, until they had a run-in with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, which said that if anything is labeled cheese, it is a dairy product. And if it's a dairy product, they have to have a full-blown dairy kitchen. Now, what does that mean? It means that they have to have pasteurization equipment, sterilization equipment. They have to have a sloping floor for when they clean out the spilled milk products and everything. And they have to have duplicative inspections that they pay for. They're already inspected by the Department of Health, but now they also have to be inspected by the CDFA. All of this is very expensive. They rent their space. They can't slope the floor. What are they going to do? And their only option would be not to identify as cheese. But identifying as cheese is important for vegan product placement purposes. So they fought unproductively. They fought the CDFA. So now this is what they do. Okay, this will advance. Now this is what they do. I thought this was so subversive and clever of her. So you'll see their product now is firm herb and chive raw cultured cashew, formerly called cashew cheese. And so people who are searching for cheese, cashew cheese, will be able to pull this up, which was important to her. But if you look to the left, you'll see where they get a market foothold. Farmers markets, food bars, local stores only, including Whole Foods, which sells theirs. They now call their product cultured cashew after a year's delay of struggle with the CDFA. And no one in the animal law community would help them. It was actually the head of our UCLA food law and policy program who came forward and helped, to the point that the owner said, we can't stay in business and we can't remain fighting with CDFA. It's been a year, we have to make the change. So they made the change. Initially, where did people get a foothold? They get them at farmers markets. That's where cultured cashew is also sold. It was only in 2012 that finally we had in California a shift in regulations to have home bakery. Before that time, you had to actually rent commercial kitchen space in order to sell to anybody in the public. And now, fortunately for vegans, the regulations say that the regulations exclude meat and dairy products from this exemption, but so it really gives a strong position to the vegan products. But now, as long as you don't have pets and children in your kitchen while you're cooking, that's actually part of the law. As long as you don't have pets and children in your kitchen when you're preparing food, you can sell as long as your gross annual sales are below $50,000. Now, why is it important to have these footholds? Because if you can prove that you have a good, solid product, you can convince markets to dedicate precious shelf space to your product. They're not going to want to dedicate a lot of shelf space to products that they think their demographic won't purchase. So starting out at farmers markets, online sales, and then something that I'm sure you've all experienced, food trucks, is very important. So this is the green radish. It's in New York City. All cities have them. But this is the one, the cinnamon snail, that I was reading about most recently in connection with my project. So the cinnamon snail was a very popular food truck in New York City. Made a lot of sandwiches, made a lot of donuts, actually. It was very popular. And it has closed after a long run. And the reason for this is that the permits are very difficult to obtain in New York City. They were initially issued, and permit holders are holding on to them. There's a capped number of these permits, and in order to break into the food truck business, you have to rent a permit from somebody who holds it from the beginning. And because of that, these permits are wildly expensive, and it's a tough business to begin with. LA has its own food truck nightmare, which is that in 2006, a regulation, a law was enacted in LA that said that food trucks had to stay only a limited time, 30 minutes in a residential area or an hour in a commercial area, and then they had to move. They had to move at least half a mile away and stay away from their original spot for the same period of time that they'd occupied it. So if you were in a residential area, you had to stay away from your original spot for 30 minutes before you could move your food truck back into position. This was so disruptive of business. And so ultimately, there was a brave food truck proprietor who challenged this, and eventually the ordinance was found unconstitutional. Now, how was it found unconstitutional is somewhat interesting. It was found illegal in a number of ways, and so the connection between state law and the Constitution was a part of the litigation. But as I'm looking at my clock ticking, I'm just going to start with what the state law was that connected with it. And this was a law that said that you had to have a public safety reason for a local ordinance in order for that to supersede the state law. And so the state law said that you could have food trucks wherever, and there had to be a public health and safety reason not to have that state law apply. So LA said that it gives rise to criminal conduct to have food trucks. And this argument has been raised across the country. And the argument is wherever people congregate and trample the grass, you can expect criminal activity. And so it's a broken windows theory. It's the theory that food trucks are the gateway into extensive criminal activity in the communities. And there were other arguments. Probably the argument that was actually underlying it all was the competition argument. So the competition argument is that it was actually adversely affecting brick and mortar businesses in the vicinity of where the food trucks are parked. But since state law here in California says, well, that's okay, it just has to be a public safety kind of problem here, then the argument all turned on the broken windows theory and how criminal conduct flows from this. So essentially the LA city ordinance had violated the relationship between state and local law by doing something that wasn't permitted by state law. And the court found that there was not a public safety problem associated with the food trucks being there. Now the argument what I want to bring to you is that, so I brought to you several different examples. You know, it's having the fight with the CDFA. It's about changing the legislative rules so that you can have home-baked goods at farmers markets. It's about the food trucks being able to expose people to vegan food along with all that crime. Expose people to vegan food so that they can actually experience something different from what they normally have. In those three examples, the prominent players were not animal law people. They were lawyers from other fields, food fields. In the case of the food trucks, it was actually the UCLA clinical department that had students doing this, actually, as a clinical project. And they were primarily interested in race as a motivating factor for food truck exclusion. So what are animal law lawyers doing? They're fighting about labels on packages. They're not willing to fight for cashew cheese labeling because I asked and was rejected. They're busy fighting a different type of label, which is the label of egg producers. So here you see the packaging for certified humane, along with a bunch of other labels, but this certified humane is now the label. I'm not showing you something that's being fought, I'm showing you the victory. So Animal Care Certified was the label. This was the label that actually a variety of states came together and said that animal care certified eggs are not what they are represented to be. So there really wasn't the ability to certify laying hens good care in the way that the egg producers were saying that they had. So eventually a settlement was reached such that the United Egg Producers went from animal care certified eggs to certified humane raised and handled eggs. And this was the victory after much expense and much litigation. And so we move an inch when what we need to do is move a leap. So what is that leap? If we can fight about a label, and we want to be productive in fighting about the label, then we need to fight for the label of cashew cheese. We need to fight for the regulations that will enable us to have more vegan products at farmers markets, where then those producers can get the foothold into brick and mortar stores so that then they have stability. Right? We need to fight the regulations that make food truck accessibility so difficult, because these are the opportunities to normalize vegan choices. So every time there's like a food truck gathering, you know, a bunch of food trucks come to UCLA every now and then, and you're going with some friends to the food trucks, and your choice is the vegan food truck, well, that's one message. But the vegan food truck being there is a message of its own. It normalizes the choice. What Ash and Burns found in their social conformity experiment was that if you can break unanimity, you break the stronghold. That is, that change. So you have, instead of 6 confederates of the researchers saying, I choose number 1, instead, you have 5 saying, I choose number 1, and you've got 1 person saying, actually, it's number 3. It's got to be number 3. You give confidence to the naive participant to say, yeah, I think it's number 3 also. Yeah, I think I'll try that vegan food. Having that option be there and normalizing it, it's not in the vegan cheese section. It is with the gourmet cheese foods. Then you see, actually it has broken through, and this proprietor, Whole Foods, has decided that it's worth the shelf space. It's not a lot of shelf space, but it's some shelf space, and it's enough to break the unanimity. So my concern about animal law lawyers is that what they tend to do is try to fight against an existing, entrenched practice. And sometimes I think it's really good to try to fight against the industry. So for example, several states have recently banned drone hunting with drones. It so happens that they've also banned using drones for hunter harassment purposes. They're just against drone technology uses, right? Well, drone uses had not been entrenched, so it's really worth it to fight something. It wasn't an entrenched industry. But if you're fighting an entrenched industry, you have a very long fight, and at best all you do is tinker at the margins. What you will do is get a change in label. when what we really need is the change that takes the leap. So I'm going to end the formal part of my presentation with Buckminster Fuller. If I can get it to advance. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And so my hope is that more animal law lawyers will get involved in making it possible for vegan businesses to flourish. So that's the end of my formal presentation. I think that there is time for questions, but I'd actually like to hear about people's experiences as well, and their experience in the existence of vegan options being available to people they are with, and whether this theory of Burns and Ash, that if you can break unanimity, you will have more access. It puts less pressure on us in the way that Sherry and Mike were talking when they talk about, you know, we bear the burden of breaking this open for people to experience, when in fact, if they look around themselves, they'll see that it's one of their choices. So I think we have a few minutes, do we not? Yeah, we do. Great. It's timed well. Any experiences? Yes.
Actually, I lived in the New York City area for a while, and I actually encountered the cinnamon snail truck people on the vegan shelf, and I drove their food, but I actually asked them. So the issue with the cinnamon snail truck was, how should I say, they never actually really had the right to go into New York City on a daily basis to sell their food, which was the issue, because they were always relegated to Jersey City, which is a smaller community and a very much smaller community. Because when they came into New York City on rare, very rare special occasions, like it's a vegan, like vegan days or a vegan expo, they were allowed, they had to go through a special permit. So I asked them, I said, what's the issue? How come you can't come to New York City? And they told me, if you can find a food truck license, if you can find it, you would have to give them like $1 million. Plus, because so many people wanted to sell their food in New York. So that was the big issue. They were never able to really get into the city, even though people love us. So how can, like from a lawyer's that point of view, can the legal community be much more proactive, so when people are ready to start that business, they already know where to go to. That barrier is already been fought, so when vegans like the cinnamon snail wanted to get into New York City, they went there before they even had their truck up and running.
All right. So you raise a couple of issues, but one is, so where's the room here for legal advocacy? The room is in the cap on the permits that are available in the city. So the permits initially didn't cost that much, but you know, the city's objective is to keep, their idea is that they will have food trucks squeezing out everybody else, right? If they have unlimited permits available. So if we're gonna live in a world with caps, maybe we could raise the cap, but ultimately it's like adding another lane to our freeways out here. Ultimately that wouldn't solve the problem. So what does solve the problem? What solves the problem, I believe, would be breaking the monopoly power held by the original permit recipient. So saying that there's an expiration on the permits so that then it goes back into the pool of available permits is a legal change that gives access to other businesses. Now, some lawyers said to me when I was talking to them about, you know, it seems to me there's a gap in the advocacy that we do. They'd say, but that's not pure advocacy for animals, because what happens is that you're going to liberalize food trucks, and the one parked next to the vegan one is going to be selling animal stuff. And so I don't really want to make the world safer for non-vegan food trucks. So they don't see their advocacy as being, it's not pure if others could benefit from it too. So the room here is advocacy for lifting the cap, and then the other is for advising people, which is what you bring up, which is Where are the lawyers that someone can go to find out the lay of the land and maybe how it is they can structure their business in a way that takes advantage of the existing landscape in anticipation of changes. And I think that they are, at this point, can't look to the animal law community, unfortunately. And it's my goal that they actually can at some point. Now, I understand that there is an organization starting called the Vegan Trade Council, which would function with this goal in mind. I think it's in its early stages, but I think that's the hope. Yes? Yes?
I had a comment. My friend in Honolulu, a group of us is from Honolulu, and a friend of mine regularly goes up to people and says, "Is there a vegan option?" At restaurants and in shops, just as a regular habit. And she's gone up to them before, but it's on the philosophy that you might need 15 touches before something enters your brain finally. So I've had to go out to one grill, it's a meat grill restaurant, repeatedly with my department. But because the dean wants us to go to his favorite restaurant. But I keep asking for vegan options, and they've actually risen to the challenge a lot. So just in case, in the unanimity, breaking the unanimity thing, I just say, I'm sure you can rise to the challenge of grilling me some wonderful vegetables. And they did. They grilled wonderful mushrooms and asparagus, and everybody else was looking at my plate.
I definitely think that's what happens. And sometimes I will go, and I don't need to buy vegan cheese, but I will walk by that, I'll put it in my basket when other people are there, right? I wait. I go when somebody's there. Oh, I'm so glad this is here. Put it in my basket. And then before I leave, when no one's at the cheese counter, I put it back, because there are only so many packages of vegan cheese you can have in your refrigerator. What I'm doing is trying to, so I'm not having conversations, I'm just being a presence. I'm just being a vegan presence. And I think that can be one of those ways, added on to our previous speakers, as to what we can do that's gentle, that just breaks humanity. We have time for one more? Okay, great.
Hi, I don't know if anyone else here is from Portland, Oregon, but I wanted to, is anyone from Portland? No? Just wanted to share, sorry? Oh, okay, well there's a lot of good stuff happening there for veganism right now. It's really heartening. I just wanted to share a success story I've witnessed. Living there for 14 years, there was maybe 1 or 2 vegan restaurants back then, and this year 2, I think maybe 3 new all-vegan restaurants have opened. There's over 10. It's getting really trendy for non-vegans to go there, and it's making all the restaurants in the vicinity step up their game with the options, and it's just great to be able to take people out to lunch somewhere that's 100% vegan. So it is breaking that unanimity up there. And once people see that there's a market for it, and it's not just vegans going there, the vegetarians and the sad dieters go there too. So it's the ball's really rolling up there, and it's nice to see. So I thought everyone would just be happy to hear that.
That's wonderful news. That really is. So on that optimistic note, I think Bob is here to cue me to leave the stage.